Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 418 and my guest is Rick French. Rick is the co-founder of Pack Paddle Ski Adventures. He facilitates adventures to over 30 countries on all 7 continents with people from all over the world. He's also on the board of directors for Journeys of Solutions, enabling travelers to, quote, assist people and communities in the developing countries they have encountered on their trips with the goal to improve quality of life with infrastructure improvements, access to clean water, support for educational institutions, scholarship, and training, unquote, which is awesome. We had a great conversation. We talked about some of his more memorable trips, including meeting the Dalai Lama, dealing with a client's broken leg at nearly 19,000 feet, elephants, a plane crash, a sultan, just so many stories, as you can imagine, over the years that he has come to collect. I met Rick through Bonnie and Robin, who were on episode 411, and they went on one of the adventures. They went to Mount Kilimanjaro, both having had experience with cancer, Bonnie having had cancer, Robin, whose ex had cancer. Anyway, after talking with them and hearing about the adventure they had, I knew I had to talk to Rick, and he did not disappoint. What a man. What a really fascinating and good human. I can't wait for you to hear this episode. General stuff, Hey Human Podcast is now on YouTube. I'm so excited. Yes, I finally put it on YouTube. It's under official Susan Ruth. So very excited about that. If you like getting your podcasts on YouTube or want something different, there it shall be. I'm also on Patreon at Susan Ruthism. Helps keep the show ad-free. I'm on TikTok at Susan Ruthism. And you can check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links and to learn more about my guests and the show. Check out susanruth.com to learn more about me and my other artistic endeavors. And follow Susan Ruthism and Hey Human Podcast on social media. Find my albums, my music albums on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you get your music. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes, YouTube, iHeart. It's all over the place now, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please, absolutely subscribe to my YouTube channel. Oh my gosh, that would be so awesome. Again, that's youtube.com/official Susan Ruth. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Be well, be kind, be love, and here we go. Rick French, welcome to Hey Human.
Hi, Susan.
It's good to see you.
You too. You look good this morning, Susan.
That's good. I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Yes.
It's early for me. Where are you right now?
I live in Western New York, so It's just after lunch here.
Mm-hmm. It looks a bit humid out there.
Yeah, it's been pretty humid. It's getting close to 90 today. So it is. I don't like it when it's this hot.
No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I feel like 75 and a nice breeze. That's my happy place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, hopefully cool down again. Yes.
We're all going to have to move north as the climate keeps getting hotter.
I know. I met somebody on a plane once to Greenland, and they were headed to Greenland so they could buy some land because they knew climate was going to change. Of course, you can't buy land in Greenland, but I guess they didn't know that. Anyway, so yeah, that was kind of wild. Yeah,
that's really anticipatory.
Yeah, all right. Exactly. That's way north.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's weird that Greenland is icy and Iceland is green, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah. You probably know that story. That's kind of a wild story. Yeah.
What story?
Why it's called Greenland.
I don't know.
Well, it was a marketing deal. Eric the Red, one of his slaves got killed. So in revenge, he killed somebody. So the council in Iceland exiled him from the country. So he had to leave Iceland. So he sailed around and he landed in Greenland. So to get people to come to Greenland, he sent people back and said, "Oh, it's so green. You can raise cattle here. There's farms." Yeah, that's why it's called Greenland. It was, I don't remember, it's like the 1100s or 1300s, something like that.
Learn something new every day. Love it.
Yeah, because we've kayaked over there where he landed, where they lived. We've kayaked over in Greenland to the ice cap there and stuff. So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Well, let's get into you. Where were you born? How did you grow up? Were you an adventurer from the get-go?
Growing up is a question, isn't it? I don't know about that. That's still an ongoing process. I was born in Western New York, a little town called Avon. So yeah, started adventuring just as a kid, sleeping in the backyard under a tent that we would make.
And what was your first big adventure?
I think the first big one is when I left the country was when I was 17 years old. We flew over to see a friend in England. I was just 17. Small things after that, of course, back then would have been late 60s, early 70s. It's not like nowadays. So if you just went to another state, that was a big adventure. Yeah, and then went to college in Maine. As years went by, took a bus across the country and hiked a chunk of the Pacific Crest Trail north of you. We did Oregon and Washington. So north of where you are. So that was in college.
Did your family have wanderlust, or was this particularly your thing?
My dad was always, we were in scouts as kids, and I worked summer camps in the Adirondacks. So yeah, my dad always loved the outdoors too. And as years went by, he would go with us, many, many times. Yeah, he's been in Nepal with us, 5 or 6 times. Yeah, Mongolia. He went lots of places with us.
Well, I learned about you through Bonnie and Robin, and
Yes.
that they climbed Kilimanjaro with you, and that was an interesting story. And they kept talking about you, and I said to myself, that's somebody that's going to be a good storyteller. Let's get that going. So thank you for being here and for sharing your life.
Thanks, Susan.
Have you had every inoculation under the sun, I bet?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, we have to get a bunch of different shots, but that's like not really a big deal. I was just got back from Japan a couple nights ago, and I had ear was closed up, so I couldn't hear again. I was just at the doctor yesterday, and the doctor's looking, and he's like, "This is the first time I've ever told someone I don't know what's wrong, but I think there's something alive in your ear." So it didn't end up being anything alive. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Anyway, I'm like, well, pull it out. He's like, I don't know if I should. Anyway, so yeah.
What was it?
It just was an ear infection. It wasn't anything. But
oh my gosh.
It was just, but yeah, shots, different things. I've been pretty lucky. I've never had dengue fever, never had malaria, never had any hookworm, some basic stomach parasites and amoebas and things. But I've been really lucky, nothing unusual.
That's good. Well, let's jump into the adventuring. When did you start your company? Why did you start it? What was the mission at the front end, and what is it now?
I got out of college in 1980, and even in high school, I always knew I wanted to do outdoors in some way for a job. So after college, for 5 years, I worked around the country for programs like Outward Bound, taking kids that were at-risk populations. Sometimes we'd pick them up in the jails in handcuffs, take them in the middle of a swamp, search them, and they'd spend 30 days. If they did well, they got to go home. So I did that from 80 to 85 all over the country. And then during that period of time, I'm an identical twin. So my brother was back here in New York, and he wanted to start an outdoor business too. So he and my dad had already kind of put that together. In 85, they're like, well, come back to New York and start this outdoor business with us. So I moved back to New York with that intention, and bought a house that needed redone, so he had a cheap place to live. And initially we just went to his apartment and pulled the drawer out and dumped it and set a phone next to it. And that's how we started. And then we spent that winter making our first couple canoes. Back then we taught cross-country skiing and backpacking, small things. And then as the years went by, it got, bigger and bigger until now we've been on all 7 continents a few times. But that was the original intention. It was quite a bit different than it is now, but the world was different back then. The point was just to enjoy being in the outdoors with people. And then as time went along, the intention changed a bit in that, realization as you get older at some point. You just feel fortunate to have these amazing gifts in your life. And it's almost like a responsibility, not like in an obligation way, but in like a way of like a way if you want to share the things that have come into your life, feeling that they're a gift. So then the intention kind of changed to sharing more the experiences of the world and the adventures that could be had, and watching how it impacted people's lives so much. How it changed people's, as from the story of Bonnie and Robin. We have so many stories of lives that have been changed. It's pretty huge. So yeah, there's a bunch of different types of projects that have developed over the years, from wells in other countries to schools to we just got back from building a dorm at my Tanzania friend's village in Tanzania. We were in Morocco in the fall and right after the earthquake, and it was pretty intense. People were not able to go into their houses and stuff. And Jama, who works with me, and I were like, this is just often what happens is we travel somewhere and something comes to us and we can't really ignore it. And we just couldn't go home knowing there were people who didn't have homes anymore. So we came home and we raised some money and we donated all the money from the trip. And I just got a message last week that Rashid and his family just moved into their home in Morocco in the Atlas Mountains. But I don't know, so many projects, schools, and wow, I don't know. Yeah.
When you are a person of the world.
I like that. I'm a person of the world.
Yeah.
Go, Susan. Go ahead and ask.
When you're a person of the world, how does that shape how you see the world at large in its foibles and fisticuffs? And how does that make you?
Yeah.
Does it egg you on and push you forward?
Oh yeah, there's lots of pieces to that, but for sure, the world is very, very small to me. When there's a war in Ethiopia, that's my friends. That's like people that are now widows. Those are people, that have no food. When there's the earthquake in Nepal, those are my friends' houses. When COVID hit, my Tanzania friends that helped us so much on the mountain, they had no food. They were selling their clothes. The world's very, very small. People are the same all over the world. That's kind of like a world view, but there's a sense of everybody all over the world is the same. Kids like to play. People like to be loved. People like to sit with each other and be heard. People like to laugh. People all over the world are the same. Everybody just wants to be happy. So there's that, awareness. Fortunately, in my worldview, it's a hopeful view, because if you listen to the media, which is mostly motivated by making profits, so they scare people and are angry, and then people believe that that's how the world is. But that is not at all the case of the world. The case of the world is people are amazing and beautiful. 99% of the time, every story I could tell you would be about someone who helped us, someone who, we shared time with, played cards with at Everest Base Camp in Tibet. And that way, my view of the world is hopeful. That people, I think in their nature, want to be kind. They want to share love, which is much different than most people's view of the world. But that's my experience. I've been told I live in a bubble, and my response to that is, I like my bubble. I think it's the rest of the world that lives in a bubble.
I was just going to say everybody else lives in a bubble because they are being fed a steady diet of xenophobia and
exactly.
Hate.
It's heartbreaking to me, and people are so afraid now. Your kids go to school and there's a sheriff outside and there's metal detectors and the doors are locked. Like, what message does that give? That compared to like, a little kid in Japan, or especially the Tanzania kids, that are just so welcoming and come up immediately and want to hold your hand and sing with you or twirl the hair on your arm. Yeah, I don't know the answer to all that. I just know that people live very, very afraid and anxious. Mm-hmm. And this is not my experience of the world.
Have you been to the top of Everest?
No. That's like a big freaking deal. No, I'll never go there. Yeah, people are kind of, if you don't climb mountains, like you might ask me that question, but to go to high altitudes above 26,000 feet, where what they call the death zone, that's like a big deal. That's a Russian roulette gamble, whether you live, die, and highest I bet is 20,000 feet a few times, and I have no interest in going any higher. I don't really understand it because at that altitude, you don't feel good. And even when I like the physical challenge, but when it's a challenge that happens because of outside of my body and I'm feeling crappy, it's hard for me to enjoy the mountain. So I have absolutely no interest. We go to the bottom of Everest, which is like close to 18,000 some, but yeah, no, never been to the
Which is
top.
still pretty high.
It is still pretty high. That is true. There are many high places.
Because
Sure.
Kilimanjaro's what, no, 18 or something? 19?
19,340.
Yeah, right off the top of your head. I love that.
Been there a few times, so I know.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure you're well versed in recognizing when people are starting to have issues.
Oh yeah.
I bet they fight you and they don't want to stop, but
depends on the person, depends on the issues. Usually if someone's bad enough that they can't continue, no, they're not fighting you. They want you to tell them they can't continue. They want someone else. Sometimes they know. They just like to be reinforced, like, yes, this is enough. This is not safe now.
yeah.
So no, if someone still has enough fight to say they want to continue, for the most part, they're probably okay.
I love that. They're just looking for a reason. They need you to tell them that it's done.
Sometimes, exactly. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, my dear friend Damaru, on the way down from Kili one time, he caught the toe of his foot and tripped forward. And we were at the end of the line. I turned around and went back. And he's like, Rick, I think I broke my leg. But people tell me that a lot. And no one actually had broken it at that point. They just hurt themselves. So I'm like, oh, I don't know. But first bad sign was Damaru. Damaru's tough. He's not one that would be a baby and say that. So I'm like, okay, but people still tell me that. And then he said, I heard a snap. That's like sign number 2. That's bad. So then I palpated his leg, and there's a huge dent in the front of his one shin. I'm like, Damaru, feel this. Is that supposed to be there? He's like, no. I'm like, yeah, you broke your leg. So yeah, we had to improvise a splint. We cut shoelaces out of our boots and cut stuff sacks to make rope, and took twine and made a splint out of my friend Yusuf and I. Took trekking poles and made a splint, and then we put him on a sleeping pad and dragged him down the mountain. It was snow too at that point, until 12 of the porters came up the mountain with burlap bags. And then we carried him down to the base camp at 15.5. We duct taped him into a stretcher with a sleeping bag and a tarp because he had to go over cliffs. We didn't want him to fall off the stretcher. So he was okay. He wasn't too shocky or anything, just a little bit of pain. People always, why don't you helicopter him out? Well, slight possibility you could get a helicopter maybe from Nairobi. By the time you do that, these guys could have him out. So yeah, we took 2 days and got him down the mountain. Eventually flew him home, and he had some surgery. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm just picturing being duct taped to the outside of a helicopter and being like, okay, you're good.
Yeah, well, that was just, we duct taped him into the stretcher because when you're going over cliffs, you're putting the thing, kind of vertical. I didn't want to fall off. Really, we just wrapped. He was a good sport about it.
They never do that in the show MASH.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we probably do in real life. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And you got to meet the Dalai Lama.
I did, yeah. Some of these things happen because I sit in my living room, and every now and then ideas come to me. And a couple of years ago, I had this idea. I'd like to see and look into the eyes of the most spiritual person in the world. So I thought, who would that be? And the Dalai Lama popped in my mind. So I'm like, I should go meet the Dalai Lama. This is like how my mind goes. It wasn't really a practical or thought out idea. It was just like, that's what I should go do. So then I started looking into it, and I'm like, okay, he lives in Dharamshala. We could set up a trip. We'll go to Dharamshala. Been to India and Nepal a few times. And there's some great trekking there. Hey, when we're there, we should do something more than just trek and see the Dalai Lama. Let's volunteer with the Tibetan refugees for a while. So we did that too. So yeah, but we didn't know we could see the Dalai Lama. We just knew, we didn't even know if he'd be there. So we set up this whole experience to do that. And when I was coming back from Everest Base Camp the year before, it was after the earthquake in Nepal, and my friends' houses had been damaged. so we were going to help them with their houses. But Kami comes to me. He's very, very devout Buddhist up in the Solokhumbu area, is the Everest area. The Sherpa people, and especially the older people, extremely Buddhist, very, ritualistic. And he's like, I should come with you. Okay. And then his other buddy, Lakpa, says the same thing. I'm coming with you too. And then Kami's wife says, Doma. Doma says, I'm coming too. I'm like, okay, well, with the communication and stuff and with the Sherpas, I never know what that actually means. I just said, okay. So as the year went along, I contacted them and I was like, hey, your house has got ruined. We really should, put that money and come to your place to help rebuild your houses. And Kami's response was, no, it's more important to see the Dalai Lama. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
So anyway, so we go, and my son, and we go to Dharmashala, and the Dalai Lama was in at home. As far as I knew, no Americans had got in to see him. No, nobody had seen him. Other people would come and see him, a lot of Buddhist people and stuff, but no Americans. So after a week or so working with the Tibetan refugees, this is after we trekked some, I sent my son down to Delhi to pick up, to jump on a bus and get my Sherpa friends to come. So they come. And I think that afternoon, before I was even back from a little hike in the hills, they'd gone down to the temple. And they're like, Rick, we're going to see the Dalai Lama tomorrow. I'm like, how did you do that? Like, oh, we just went to the office and asked. Like, easy, you come with us. I will show you. So I go the next day, and there's this line of people out the door. But these guys had an invite to go. So they go in. I go into the office with them, and they're very, very reverent. And we're passing through the office, and they go on in, and the office says, oh, and I said, oh, is it possible we could meet the Dalai Lama? And they're like, oh, you're American. You write email. So back to the lodge and wrote an email explaining I was there with my family and we were working with the Tibetan refugees and my dear Sherpa friends were there, blah, 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 blah. And I thought I would never hear anything. Like a day or so later, like 9:00 at night, it was kind of message. It's like, His Holiness would be glad to meet you. So yeah, we went down and there's all these Kham people. Kham is an area of Eastern Tibet, beautiful Tibetan people. And people make this pilgrimage to go see the Dalai Lama. And there's maybe 100, 150 of these beautifully dressed, laden Kham people often wear long black ponytails and massive jade jewelry. And they're carrying massive amounts of jewelry and gifts. And there's 100, 150 people, these guys lined up outside. I mean, it's amazing the reverence they have. We know nothing in America of reverence like that. I mean, that is so enlightening alone.
Well, we did that with celebrity, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a little different. It's a little different what we worship there, I think. But yes, unfortunately, it's right.
Although I'm a little uncomfortable with humans worshiping humans, but I get the concept. It's the idea that they represent. And the Dalai Lama, for those that don't know, is in their belief system, he is a reincarnation of the Dalai Lama before that, and so on and so forth, all the way back.
Yes. Yeah. So for them, it's not so much worshiping him as a blessing in their life. In the Buddhist system, you want to gain as much merit as you can to move along through your different cycles of your life. So it's a way for them to gain more merit. So anyway, we went and eventually they call us and hung out with them for a little bit, had some pictures taken. And he's like, where are you from? I'm like, oh, you've been nearby here. I said, you spoke in Ithaca. There's a little town, college town nearby. He's like, oh yes, Ithaca, very small town. So we had a little chat, and yeah, it was really emotional. We were all crying. It was really emotional.
Does he have that supernatural almost presence? I've heard that he does.
I don't know about supernatural, but I would say a very holy presence. Holy as in like peaceful and still and connected to that piece of ourselves, I don't know what the words are. All different spiritualities use different words for that energy, that vibration. There's a sense of his being present to that and aware of it. Yeah. And part of it. Yeah. It's really emotional to look at his eyes. Really amazing. But the whole experience was amazing. talking to the Tibetan refugees who've been electrocuted and tortured, and their families are tortured. And Kami and his wife, you do koras. Koras in Tibetan Buddhism, a kora is a circle around some sacred area. It could be a mountain, it could be a temple. Every day, again, it helps you gain merit. Every day there'd be hundreds, of Kami and his friends, would spin in the prayer wheels and chanting, to be just amongst all that. Just to be amongst the people that are so reverent and believe and live a life where they value so much spiritual parts of ourselves, which is not common in the US.
I read a book about Bali once, and it spoke a lot about that. I assume I kind of liken the Bali people and the Nepalese people as having that same, they're tapped into such a deeper reverence than some people from the rest of the world.
I think a lot of people that live close to the land are that way. I think the farther we get from the land, we tend to lose that. I think when you live close to the land, it's pretty hard to miss that connection. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. You were once alone in the desert for 40 days?
Yeah, just before I was in Japan in the last couple of weeks, I went into southern Utah to the canyons there to do a desert solo. And it was purposely kind of left you could hike like the Crest Trail or something and be alone, but then you still have a task every day. So I had my pack raft, so there was a 100-mile river. And I walked out a 4-wheel drive to get resupplied twice. But on that 100-mile river, I have this little 8.5-pound raft. So I could go a few miles and there'd be another canyon, and I would hike that canyon for an hour or 3 days, whatever I felt like. But the idea was to be immersed alone in really, really intense beauty. It's one of my favorite areas. And it was a really, really intense experience. The first 2 weeks were really, really hard. It was really scary, and just to process things in your life that have been painful or hurtful or sad. It's pretty brutal. And that was not for the faint of heart. And then it kind of transitioned, but then by the end, it was just this amazing awareness. I only slept under my tarp 3 nights because of rain. The other 37 nights, you're under the stars. I have pretty minimal stuff. Basically, the clothes I'm wearing, and a tarp and a sleeping bag, tarp if it rains, and my raft, of course, and a pack, and some food. But so you have pretty minimal stuff, and you're just exposed the whole time. And especially to me in Utah, the sunrise, sunset, the rocks glow. I don't know how they do it, because the light seems to come from within the rocks, but that's my experience of it. So there's this, and in addition, you're like going to these places where there's one stretch where there were like 9 giant alcoves in a row. And 1,000 years ago, people lived in each of those. There was evidence of where they lived. So there's this whole blend of antiquity, eternalness, of experiencing kind of being part of nature, or I don't want to sound too new agey. It's kind of a hard thing to express, but it was an incredibly stilling experience, and you developed a real awareness, that there's a stillness inside of us that we don't normally tap into. And that, like, that's the real place. That's each of us, that's who each of us are. And it's so much different than how we normally live. It was amazing. Yeah.
When you go into something like that, do you have an idea of the processing you're going to do, or does everything come up naturally?
Well, I think, for me, I have an awareness. I didn't want to have like big expectations or rigid ones, because if you have that expectation, I see this for people on trips, then you limit what happens to fit in within those expectations. So instead, I was very conscious to just be present to whatever was happening. It's part of the beauty of what happened. So being that long alone and that quiet, you almost like observed what you were experiencing and feeling, whether it was sadness or pain or loneliness, fear, joy, happiness, calmness. It almost was like looking at inside yourself, and you could see that. So that whatever kind of came up, I didn't change it. I didn't really even think about it too much. I just watched it. And then I would watch how it would change, or usually what happened was after a while, weren't even that in that place again. It just disappeared. And it was interesting, initially I was like, it wasn't going to have any structure, but I found that I needed a minimal structure. It helped me feel a little bit more grounded. Like, okay, I'll do a little yoga, then I'll have breakfast, and then I'll sit and read or write for half an hour, and then I'll walk for a while, see where I am. So minimal structure. But the thing that kept free was just to pay attention to the experience you're having inside, which is amazing. Yeah.
Do you believe in God? Are you a religious person or a spiritual person?
I would say spiritual. God's a tough question because that means that's so loaded for so many people.
For sure.
I use that word sometimes, for myself, for convenience. For me, it's more like an awareness. The best I could come out of it from the desert with was there's more like at some point came out with an awareness that there's like an all forever and eternity kind of like waves or energy that if we're still and allow ourselves that we will move with that, be part of it. It sounds too mystical, so I'm reluctant to.
It doesn't. It makes total sense. It doesn't sound mystical.
Yeah, so I have that awareness that there's some sort of something. I don't believe in like an omnipotent, somebody's up there pulling strings. Nothing like that. Mm-hmm. It's more like that there's an energy or a presence or a pattern maybe that when we're with that pattern, we're calm, we're happy, we're more kind, we're more generous. We can then still experience pain or sadness or suffering, but there's a calmness below it that makes it okay. Mm-hmm. So it's more like that. But also, there's like a pattern, and I wouldn't say destiny or whatever, but there's when you live like in that place or in that awareness, things come into your life. And I don't even want to really use the word that are supposed to come into your life. If you live in that aware, then there are things that come into your life, like that idea, like, oh, I should go see the Dalai Lama, or like, oh, I should go, whatever,
It's the flow. You get in with the flow.
Yeah, it's more like just a flow, but you have to kind of be still enough and notice it and just say, okay, because normally we would tend to be scared or shut down or say that's not possible. I don't know how many times I've done things that aren't possible, but it never really occurred to me. I mean, sometimes it didn't work, that's okay too. Not everything played out, but a lot of that stuff was played out way beyond anything I ever could have created or written or expected in my life.
Oh, we limit ourselves far more than the universe will limit us. Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing to have been able to live in that way. I'm super fortunate. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Did you encounter a single soul on this journey?
Occasionally, like the first 7 days, no footprints. But there were maybe 3 or 4 access points where people could come in from the side into that main canyon. And then I might see a couple people. Yeah. But I could go days and not see a footprint. So occasionally I'd see people. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sounds really wonderful, actually.
It was pretty amazing, Susan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know you have a story about elephants, which is one of my favorite creatures. Tell me the elephant story.
Sometimes we've used elephants to go look for like tigers in the jungle and things. And one time we were using elephants to cross a river by the border of India and Nepal. And there was a young baby with a cleft palate, and cleft palates you can't nurse, so the baby would die. And we had in our group a woman who had a cleft palate. So this is many years ago, before I had done so many of those projects that we mentioned before, wells and schools and dorms and kids and orphans and things. The baby, the person in our group was very moved by the situation this young baby was in and said, can we do something? So we used our interpreter to talk with the mom. And as it turned out, shorten the story a bit, all it took was $100 to pay for a bus ticket and a hotel, because in Kathmandu, a Japanese doctor would come once a month to perform this surgery. So for $100, So the next year, we're back riding elephants across the river again with another group. And they had another baby and they came running out. And first they were very excited and they're showing us the baby that was nursing and living. And then they were scared because they had another baby. So again, the second time, we also sent them to Kathmandu for that surgery. That's amazing. But those things, that's kind of what I say. Like if you just live with your eyes open a little, these things come into your life and then you kind of you just do it because it's there. You stop and pause and talk to these people and pay attention. And you realize this is nothing to take care of this and help these people. It's so easy.
Yeah. And again, the world is a tiny place.
Such a tiny place. It is very small. Yeah, people are the same everywhere. So really beautiful.
So I have written down here, let me just look. It says, I was a guide on the highest mountain in Antarctica with the Sultan of Saudi Arabia and a plane crash with a dog sled driver of Admiral Byrd. Those are two stories, I suppose.
That's all one same story.
Oh, it's one story?
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
So, over the years, that's one of the big ones. So another time years ago, I had this idea that I should have life goals. I was maybe in my 30s back then. Now that everybody should have life goals. That's what I've heard. So I'm like, oh, I should have life goals. I'm kind of a little irreverent and a little silly. So I'm like, oh, I should have life goals. Kind of like half like, oh, that's a good idea. And half like, this is fun. This is silly. So I'm like, let's see. I need to go where they invent chicken wings. I need to drive a bulldozer and I should go to Antarctica. So I'm like, okay. So I'm like, well, how do you get to Antarctica? Well, I had no money doing this job. You have almost no money. That's a choice you make when you do this kind of work. So I'm like, and it's really expensive to go there. So I didn't want to just do a cruise along the coast. That didn't interest me. And there was only one outfit in the world, how you can get to the interior of Antarctica. And they're set up to do logistics to climb the highest mountain there called Mount Vincent. So these people that want to do the 7th summit thing, all these highest mountains around the world, they go. And to get there, what you have to do is you go to Chile and then you fly onto the continent, onto the ice in the middle of the continent, Antarctica. That's how you get there. And you have to go through these folks. And now they have a jet, but back when I did it, there was a C-130. I wrote them. I'm like, hey, I'm Rick French from South Lima. Like they would know that is. Yeah, I'm like an outdoor guide. I'll come in for free. I'll help, guide your clients up this mountain. Like I didn't really have the experience anyway. A month before November, I got a phone call like, hey, we got an opening. Can you come in a month down to Antarctica and help be an assistant guide? I'm like, yeah. So yeah, I flew down there and sitting around any bush flights, whether it's the Antarctica or the Arctic, you never know really when you're going to fly, but particularly Antarctica, especially back then. So you sit in the airport every day until they think there's good weather. In this case, there were a few people already in place on this base camp. So every day we'd go to the airport and wait. Well, I'm in the airport. First, we're sitting around with these guys. There's some Middle Eastern guys, and I don't know, playing cards or just chatting, and they're introducing themselves, and they go around. And one guy's like, "Oh, I'm the Sultan of Saudi Arabia." I'm like, oh, "Okay." Another guy's like, the other guy didn't speak. He was Korean. His friend spoke for him. He's like, "Oh, he's whatever his name is. He's like climbed Everest 5 times and 3 times in the winter." And they got to me, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm Rick from South Lima, But anyway, also in the airport was Norman Vaughn. And Norman in 1928 was going to school at Harvard, and he was a dog sled musher. And Admiral Byrd needed dog sled mushers when he flew across Antarctica. He had to set up depots. So they used dog sled mushers to set those depots. So in 1928, Norman Vaughn was this young college kid as the dog musher for him. So Admiral Byrd named a mountain for him. So Norman's well into his 80s now. There's this amazing guy. He lived in Alaska. He handed me his business cards, like the oldest and slowest. He'd done like I did around 13 times. And what had happened was the year before, there was only one plane that flew to Antarctica. And this pilot of that plane this year that I went started his own company to compete with the old company. And he flew, I think it was a DC-3. Bruce was his name. So Bruce was starting this competing company, and Norman Vaughn, hired on with him to fly him to go dog sled to his mountain and climb it. It was also the last year that you could dog sled in Antarctica because they nixed the dogs because the dogs bring disease and it's not good for the seals. So all these pieces are like coming together at this moment in this place. He needed to raise like $1 million or $2 million. He's like 500,000 or $1 million short. So National Geographic's there with them because they were one of the sponsors. And so you're hanging out, like having grilled cheese with all these people. And Sultan's talking about the racehorse he owns for the Kentucky Derby. Anyway, eventually we fly in the C-130 down there. The Sultan was with us. He was going to fly to the South Pole. He wasn't going to climb Vincent. I had other clients who were climbing Vincent. So as we fly down, once we land, a couple hours later, what had happened was this other plane that Norman wasn't on it, but his advance crew was on it. And the DC-30 tried to trail the C-130, but it was slower. And by the time he got to Antarctica, the fog had settled and he crashed. So when I was woke up, there were plane crash survivors in the kitchen tent, and they were still chasing down some dogs and some survivors. So there was a lot of drama, of course, because it's a pretty serious situation. Obviously, there's a bunch of survivors from a plane crash. One guy was injured pretty bad, Jerry, and I took turns in the med tent with him. Basically, he's on morphine, and he's busted up in the head and his leg. And my job was when he had to go to the bathroom, he'd be kind of groaning. I'm like, "Oh, you got to go, Jerry?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "All right, roll over. Hang on, I got it. Go ahead. You're in the bottle." Eventually, National Geographic paid for a rescue plane to go get them, which is about $100,000 back then. So that took all of them off, and then we went and climbed Mount Vincent, which, these bush planes and little bush plane. It's a twin otter, and couldn't get there. Sat down like 1 a.m. Sat down, and we sat down at an old Chilean army base that had been abandoned because they had crashed a plane too. So they abandoned this army base, and everything was buried. So at 1 a.m. with nothing else to do, there's a few bamboo poles sticking up. So we went around, dug by those bamboo poles, and pulled up tents, and we pulled up benches and stoves and food. And we just started cooking and eating all this food that had been buried for 10 years. We didn't really have anything else to do. So anyway, then we went on and, climbed the mountain, which was, an adventurous climb and all that. And, we got back. I left the continent, and then Norman had to downsize his expedition. It's kind of a cool story. He downsized because he didn't have much money. So he downsized to 3 guys to help him. And they flew him to the continent. Now they flew him with the same agency I was using, like very much downsized. I don't even know if National Geographic was still on board with him then. They flew him to the base camp, but he never got the weather to go climb his mountain. So what happened was there was some guy that had a lot of money. So everybody around the base camp, he was very charismatic, Norman. He's like 82-year-old, just a great guy, but very charismatic. So after a month of living in this base camp on the ice, this guy with a bunch of money comes back from the South Pole. Some people go just a day to go see the South Pole. Comes back into camp, and this guy's like, "Well, why is everybody so quiet? What's up today?" And they're like, "Oh, Norman couldn't get to his mountain." So the guy pulls out his checkbook and walks over and gave him, I don't know, $50,000. Said, "Here for next year." So he did end up going the next year. By then he couldn't have dogs anymore because this thing was in place, and he did. And they flew him to the base, and he did eventually climb that mountain. So, yeah, that's that story.
Wow. That's a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah, right?
Do you stay in contact with Norman or the Sultan or any of the people along the way?
A little bit, peripherally from my Alaska friends. I knew when Norman died. The guys that were on the climb, all of them continued and tried to climb Everest. One of them was there on the climb the year that Krakauer was there. There was all that drama, and they wrote that book. So one of my clients, Lou, he's in that book. And so I did contact him because he was on the mountain and he didn't get to the top, but he had a different take than Krakauer's book.
What was the book's take?
Well, Krakauer, that's a long story. I mean, Krakauer was there trying to understand why all those deaths occurred. There was either a lot of deaths on the mountain. So Krakauer was there just trying to tell the story, but anyway, that's a complicated question. But it
claimed a lot of lives.
Yeah, I think 18 this year. Sherpa language called Chomolunga, not Everest. So the locals call it Chomolunga. but yeah, anyway, so the one guy tried to go to Everest. He didn't go. The other guy I heard from, he was on the Tibetan side. He tried to go up there till he passed some dead bodies. And he's like, Rick, why am I here? I wasn't with him. He wrote me later. He's like, I just turned around after a few dead bodies. And the other third guy was a fireman and contacted me because he wrote a book. So I was in this book for a little brief part, and he had gotten into this drama on some rescues. He got stuck on a Ferris wheel. So I did have conversation after Vincent with the guys that were clients. Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
You've had now what, 1,000 different clients around the world? I mean, you've been doing it for a long time. I imagine the numbers are up there.
It's got to be huge, right? I mean, counting starting in 80, if you count all the delinquent at-risk programs, that's like 45 years. I mean, I know I look like I'm probably 35, but
you look young. Yeah.
Thank you.
How was your Japan trip? What did you go to Japan for, and how was the journey?
That's a really neat, amazing trip. Well, we go there to do the Kumano Kodo, which is a Shinto Buddhist pilgrimage. So starting 1,000 years ago, the people in Japan would make a pilgrimage to the Kii Peninsula. It has a lot of springs and hot springs, and emperors and abdicated emperors would take 800 of their finest friends as they take their servants, and they carry the emperor. That for 1,000 years, they've been doing this pilgrimage through the mountains. So there's shrines, ancient sutra burials. Sutras are in Japanese Buddhism. Sutras, you copy Buddhist writings, and that gains you merit. And those sometimes are buried. That's a sutra. So there's these sutra mounds, these buried mounds of these sutras on the way. So it's this combination of ancient spirituality with these shrines along the way that you pray at and ring the bell at and wash your hands at. Hot springs to soak in, very rural local culture, little villages, beautiful people. So it's a really unique way to experience Japan. So because you have the spiritual piece, you have the historic piece, you have the beautiful scenery, you have this incredible food that's there. It's pretty much every experience that we do is more around experience than collecting a view of someplace. Everything we do, we try to immerse people into some deeper way of experiencing that place with the people or in some way. So it's a very, very interesting country, much different than ours. It's incredibly clean, incredibly safe, and the people are extremely respectful and very kind and gentle. Really lovely people in Japan. We have a lot to learn from their gentleness and respect.
Of all the places you've been, do you have favorites, or do you love all your children equally?
When people ask me that and they're on a trip, I always go, the one that you're on with me right now. That's my standard answer. Yeah, I mean, there's Antarctica and there's the rest of the world, so you can't really compare that. So I tend to like wild places, extreme places. So obviously Antarctica. Outside of that, I'm more of a cooler place. I like mountains. So I either like really, really wild mountains, like the Arctic, like way up in the Arctic, bush plane drop off, nobody around for 400 miles, really extreme places like that, or places like the Andes or the Himalayas, where you have a mix of amazing mountains, but you also have really interesting culture. So yeah, the Himalayas, the Andes, or Greenland, because Greenland's so extreme too and remote. Yeah, those kind of places are my favorites. Mm-hmm.
Eric the Viking would be happy to hear that, I'm sure.
Exactly. But I like being home too. I live in a really gorgeous place. I'm quite content to be home too. It's really beautiful where I live right now. Yeah.
Have you ever been on one of these excursions and thought, oh, this is it, I'm no more on the planet?
I suppose, but you really don't allow yourself to go there. That's not really a healthy way of thinking. So it's not really an option in your brain. Yeah. You just keep coming up with more solutions.
Yeah.
You don't really go to that place, even if it gets dicey. You don't think that. I mean, I suppose in passing, maybe, but if that thought starts to come, you just don't go there. You just come up with another possibility, another way to stretch supplies, another way to stay warm, another way to get dry, whatever, another way to keep people safe. So not really. not too much. Yeah.
Yeah. You're an interesting guy. Can't wait to read your book.
I'm not writing a book. That's way too much work. And there's a lot of things to do besides write a book. Now, there's a lot of things to experience yet, and a lot of other. It's not my skill set.
I get it. Tell people how they might find you and maybe go on an adventure with you.
Well, that's pretty easy. You could just type in the company name, Pack Paddle Ski, but packpaddleski.com. Just type in packpaddleski.com will come up. You can do it on Facebook. You can do it. You can type in Rick French on Facebook. You can type in Pack Paddle Ski on Facebook. You can type Pack Paddle Ski. The website comes up. That's pretty easy to find me.
Yeah.
I mean, people in Canisius where I live don't know me, but other people know me. I don't know if people in Canisius know where to find me, but that's where I live. Yeah.
Rick, thank you so much for your time.
It was great to meet you. It'd be more fun to do an adventure with you, though.
Yeah. I mean, who knows what might be.
Exactly. It was a delight. I read you, I looked at your information, how you got into that. It's really, I love that you attempted to do this. We need more people who try to follow their dreams like that, because it's hard. So I really admire that you took this on, and what you're trying to do. We need more of that. So,
Thank you.
It's just great when you do this. You tend to connect with other people who do and view the world in the same way. You're part of my bubble now.
Yay. I love it. Well, one of my best friends, she's an adventurer. She's been to so many places, and I'm sure she's going to be excited to hear this episode. I don't know that she wants to climb on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. I'm pretty sure that's a no, but some of this other stuff, maybe,
Yeah, we do other things that aren't quite as rigorous as that. Like Japan's not too rigorous.
Yeah, that one really, that piqued my interest. That's right up my alley.
A bunch of things we do aren't that rigorous. Yeah, they're ski in Norway. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, Rick, it's such a pleasure. Please stay in touch. You're very cool.
You have a really nice day, okay?
You too. All right, take care. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.